Tapos ano? Ito ba yung agenda natin? Dito na. Second reading. Dati na lang nila.
Consti.
Session resumes. Majority Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I move we take up the additional reference of business, ask the Secretary General to read the title of the said measures. So move, Mr. Speaker.
Is there any objection? Chair hears none. Motion is approved, and the Secretary General is directed to read the titles of the bills and resolutions on first reading for referral to the appropriate committees.
Additional reference of business. Bills on first reading. House Bill 8939, accelerating public sector investments in local infrastructure, establishing for the purpose the local Build program by Representative Santos Recto.
To the Committee on Public Works and Highways.
House Bill 8940, providing for remuneration, benefits, allowances, and other entitlements for frontline civil servants at the barangay level, establishing for the purpose a Magna Carta for barangay officials, personnel, and voluntary workers by Representative Santos Recto.
To the Committee on Local Government.
House Bill 8941, providing for a resettlement program for displaced persons residing in danger zones in Davao del Sur by Representative Cagas.
To the Committee on Housing and Urban Development.
House Bill 8946, converting the Cebu City Medical Center in Cebu City into a national hospital by Representative Abellanosa.
To the Committee on Health.
House Bill 8947, declaring Berhen Falls in Barangay Dansolohin in Cagayan de Oro City an ecotourism site by Representative Rodriguez.
To the Committee on Tourism.
House Bill 8948, declaring January 10 of every year as a special working holiday in Cagayan de Oro City to be known as Cagayan de Oro Fiesta Nacional by Representative Rodriguez.
To the Committee on Local Government.
House Bill 8949, declaring Igbalalay Falls in Barangay Balubal in Cagayan de Oro City an ecotourism site by Representative Rodriguez.
To the Committee on Tourism.
House Bill 8950, declaring Migtalahid Falls in Barangay Dansoluhin in Cagayan de Oro City an ecotourism site by Representative
To
Rodriguez.
the Committee on Tourism.
House Bill 8951, declaring Migtugsok Falls in Barangay FS Catanico in Cagayan de Oro City an ecotourism site by Representative Rodriguez.
To the Committee on Tourism.
House Bill 8952, declaring Sinulong Falls and Bulao Cold Spring in Barangay Tignapoloan in Cagayan de Oro City an ecotourism site by Representative Rodriguez.
Committee on Tourism.
House Bill 8953, declaring Ulo Balongkot Falls in Barangay Dansolihon in Cagayan de Oro City an ecotourism site by Representative Rodriguez.
To the Committee on Tourism.
House Bill 8954, prohibiting the development of, production, stockpiling, use of chemical weapons, and providing for their destruction and providing penalties therefor by Representatives Bustos Bravo, Tupas, Defensor Michael, De Jesus, Nograles, Jericho, and Romero.
To the Committee on Public Works and Safety.
Resolutions. House Resolution 1635, urging the Committee on Agriculture to inquire on the proposal of the NEDA to lower pork tariff rates and on the assistance provided to the pork industry through the Agricultural Competitiveness Enhancement Fund by Representative Kimbo.
To the Committee on Rules.
House Resolution 1636, expressing the profound condolences of the House to the Philippine Province of the Society of Jesus and the family of Father Joaquin J. Bernes, S.J., Dean Emeritus of the Ateneo School of Law and member of the 1986 Constitutional Commission, by Representatives Velasco, Romualdez, Ferdinand, and Paduano.
To the Committee on Rules.
House Resolution 1637, celebrating the Catholic faith and commemorating the 500 years of Christianity in the Philippines, by Representatives Velasco, Romualdez, Ferdinand, and Paduano.
To the Committee on Rules.
Messages from the Senate. Message dated March 8, 2021, informing the House that the Senate on even date passed Senate Bill 1832.
To the Committee on Public Order and Safety.
Message dated March 8, 2021, informing the House that the Senate on even date passed Senate Bill number 1741.
To the Committee on Agriculture and Food.
Communication. Letter dated 1 March 2021 of the BSP Deputy Director, Office of the General Counsel and Legal Services, transmitting to the House duly certified copies of certain BSP issuances.
To the Committee on Banks and Financial Intermediaries.
Committee reports. Report number 830 of the Committees on Health and Appropriations on House Bill 8955. Report numbers 831 and 834 to 837 of the Committees on Tourism and Appropriations on House Bill numbers 8956 and 8960 to 8963. Report number 832 of the Committees on Higher and Technical Education, Appropriations, and Ways and Means on House Bill 8957. Report number 833 of the Committees on Local Government and House Bill 8958.
To the Committee on Rules.
Additional reference of business. Bills on first reading. House Bill 8959, designating at least one public attorney per branch of the regional trial courts Metropolitan Trial Courts, Municipal Trial Courts, and Municipal Circuit Trial Courts by Representative Revilla.
To the Committee on Justice.
House Bill 8964, authorizing the DA to use the annual tariff revenues in excess of 10 billion under RA 11203 for direct cash assistance to farmers owning 1 hectare or less of rice land until 2024 by Representative Yap Eric.
To the Committee on Agriculture and Food and the Committee on Appropriations.
Messages from the Senate. Message dated March 9, 2021, informing the House that the Senate on even date passed House Bill 6413 with amendments.
To the Committee on Local Government.
Message dated March 9, 2021, informing the House that the Senate on even date passed House Bill 6867 without amendment.
To the Committee on Local Government.
Message dated March 9, 2021, informing the House that the Senate on even date passed House Bill 7700 with amendment.
To the Committee on Local Government.
Committee reports. Report numbers 838 to 840 of the Committees on Tourism and Appropriations on House Bill numbers 8965 to 8967.
To the Committee on Rules. Majority Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I move that we consider for adoption House Resolution number 1627 and that the Secretary General be directed to read the title of the resolution.
Is there any objection? The Chair hears none. Motion is approved and the Secretary General is directed to read the title of House of the Resolution.
House Resolution 1627, resolution expressing the profound condolences of the House of Representatives to the family of the Honorable Jose Argulias, former representative during the 12th Congress, and the brother of Representative Eduardo Argulias of the 1st Legislative District of Cebu.
Majority Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I move that we adopt House Resolution number 1627.
Is there any objection? The Chair hears none. Motion is approved and Resolution 1627 is hereby approved. Majority Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I move that we consider for adoption House Resolution number 1629 that the Secretary General be directed to read the title of the said resolution.
Is there any objection? The Chair hears none. Motion is approved and the Secretary General is directed to read the title of the Resolution 1629.
House Resolution 1629, a resolution expressing the profound condolences of the House of Representatives on the passing of Mr. Ben Fariales, the acknowledged Dean of Philippine Fashion.
Majority Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I move that we adopt House Resolution number 1629.
All those in favor of the adoption of House Resolution 1629, please say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, please say nay. The ayes have it. House Resolution 1629 is approved. Is hereby adopted. Majority Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I move that we consider for adoption House Resolution number 1636 in consolidation with House Resolutions 1630 and 1634, and that the Secretary General be directed to read the title of the said resolution.
Is there any objection? The Chair hears none. Motion is approved and the Secretary General is directed to read the title of House Resolution 1636.
House Resolution 1636, resolution expressing the profound condolences of the House of Representatives to the Philippine Province of the Society of Jesus and the family of Father Joaquin G. Bernas, S.J., Dean Emeritus of the Ateneo School of Law and member of the 1986 Constitutional Commission.
Majority Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I move that we include as co-authors of the said resolution Representative Juan Miguel Macapagal Arroyo, Representative Javier Jesus Romualdo, Representative Crystal Bagatsing, Representative Christopher De Venecia, Representative Ria Farinas, Representative Claudine Bautista, Representative Precious Castello, Representative Manuel Zubiri, Representative Nina Taduran, Representative Anthony Peter Crisologo, and Representative Alfredo Garbin Jr. So move, Mr. Speaker.
Is there any objection? The Chair hears none. Motion is approved and the additional authors are approved. Majority Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I move that we adopt House Resolution number 1636 in consolidation with House Resolutions 1630 and 1634.
As many as are in favor of House Resolution 1636, please say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, please say nay. The ayes have it. House Resolution 1636 is adopted. Majority Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I move that we consider for adoption House Resolution 1635 1637, and that the Secretary General be directed to read the title of the measure, of the resolution.
Is there any objection? The chair hears none. Motion is approved, and the Secretary General is directed to read the title of the resolution.
House Resolution 1637, resolution celebrating the Catholic faith and commemorating the 500 years of Christianity in the Philippines.
Majority Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I move that we adopt House Resolution number 1637.
As many as are in favor of House Resolution 1637, please say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, please say nay. The ayes have it. House Resolution 1637 is adopted. Majority Leader.
Mr. Speaker, we just approved adopted House Resolutions 1629 and 1636 in consolidation with House Resolution 1630 and 1634. I move that we include as an additional co-author of House Resolutions 1629 and 1636, Deputy Speaker Lito Atienza.
Is there any objection? The chair hears none. The additional author is approved. Majority Leader.
Mr. Speaker, in accordance with our rules governing inquiries in aid of legislation, I move that we refer the following House resolutions to the appropriate committees. House Resolution 1601 to the Basic Education and Culture, House Resolution 1604 to the Committee on Dangerous Drugs and Public Order and Safety, House Resolution 1605 to the Committee on Housing and Urban Development, House Resolution 1608, Youth and Sports Development, House Resolution 1610, Aquaculture and Fisheries Resources, House Resolution 1614, Dangerous Drugs, House Resolution 1615 to the Committee on Energy, House Resolution 1616 to the Committee on Health, and House Resolution 1622 to the Committee on Senior Citizens and Persons with Disabilities. I so move, Mr. Speaker.
Is there any objection? The chair hears none. The aforementioned House resolutions are hereby referred to the aforementioned committees. Majority Leader.
Mr. Speaker, pursuant to our rules governing inquiries in aid of legislation, I move that we refer the following speeches to the appropriate committees. The speech of Representative Defensor last March 1, 2021 to the Committee on Appropriations, Representative Tan March 1, 2021 to the Committee on Women and Gender Equality, Representative Guya March 1, 2021 to the Committee on Energy, Representative Kulyamat last March 1, 2021, Indigenous Cultural Communities and Indigenous People, Representative Castro, March 1, 2021, Basic Education and Culture and Higher and Technical Education, Representative Sinsuat, March 1, 2021, to the Committee on Good Government and Public Accountability, Representative Paduano, last March 1, 2021, to the Committee on Appropriations, Representative Hataman, March 3, 2021, to the Committee on Public Order and Safety, Representative Abante, March 3, 2021, to the Committee on Dangerous Drugs and Public Order and Safety, and Representative Barbers, March 3, 2021, to the Committee on Dangerous Drugs and Public Order and Safety.
Is there any objection? The chair hears none. Motion is approved, and the aforementioned privileged speeches are hereby referred to the aforementioned committees. Majority Leader.
Speaker, I move that we resume consideration of House Bill number 8737 as contained in Committee Report 754, and that the Secretary General be directed to read the title of the measure.
Is there any objection? The chair hears none. Motion is approved, and the Secretary General is directed to read the title of the bill.
House Bill A737, an act regulating the conduct of off-campus educational activities by public and private schools.
Majority Leader.
Mr. Speaker, the parliamentary status is that we are in the period, we had terminated the period of sponsorship and debate. And we will now proceed to the period of amendments. First move that we recognize the chairman of the Committee on Basic Education and Culture, Representative Roman Romulo, to receive proposed amendments.
The Honorable Romulo is recognized to receive amendments. Majority Leader.
Speaker, I now move that we open the period of amendments.
Is there any objection? Chair hears none. The period of amendments is open.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, Majority Leader. Could we have a 1-minute suspension?
Mr. Speaker, I move that we suspend session for a minute.
Session suspended. So nandito tayo. So panay unfinished business ba tayo? Okay. Oo nga pala. Session resumes. Majority Leader.
Mr. Speaker, the parliamentary status of House Bill number 8737 is that we have just finished last night the period of interpellation and debates. We are now in the period of individual amendments. Mr. Speaker, we recognize the Honorable Chairman, Congressman Roman Romulo. Now, Mr. Speaker, I move we recognize the Honorable Joet Garcia for his individual amendments. So moved, Mr. Speaker.
The Honorable Joet Garcia is recognized for his amendments.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move to amend House Bill number 8737 to limit the application of proposed measure only to non-curricular, co-curricular, and extracurricular off-campus activities. I have here around 11 amendments, and I'll proceed with the first one. On page 1, section 3A, on line 22, between the words to and activities, delete the phrase or co-curricular, and in lieu thereof, insert the word required. On line 23, between the words activities and are, delete the word that, and in lieu thereof, insert the word and on lines 23 to 24, after the word program, delete the period and the sentence, these include educational tours, field trips, and field study or experiential learning. As amended, Section 3, Paragraph A shall read, A. Curricular activities refer to required off-campus educational activities and are an integral part of the instructional program. I so move, Mr. Speaker.
What does the sponsor say?
We have no objection. We accept.
Majority Leader?
Mr. Speaker, the majority joins the distinguished sponsor in accepting the amendments of the Honorable Garcia.
Is there any objection? The chair hears none. The aforementioned amendments are hereby approved. Majority Leader?
Mr. Speaker, there being no more individual amendments.
Meron pa. Meron pa.
Okay, I'm sorry, Mr. Speaker. I again move we recognize the Honorable Garcia for added individual amendments. So move.
The Honorable Garcia may proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On page 2, section 3C, on line 1, after the word non-curricular, insert comma and the word co-curricular, and on line 1, between the words to and non-program, insert the phrase off-campus activities that may or may not be anchored on standard curriculum and are considered. As amended, Section 3, Paragraph C shall read, letter C, non-curricular, co-curricular, or extracurricular activities refer to off-campus activities that may or may not be anchored on standard curriculum and are considered non-program-based activities but are deemed relevant and desirable to broaden the opportunity for learning. I so move, Mr. Speaker.
What does the distinguished sponsor say?
We accept, Mr. Speaker.
Majority Leader?
Mr. Speaker, we join the distinguished sponsor in accepting the individual amendments. Mr. Speaker, I move that we again recognize
Is there any
the Honorable
objection?
Garcia.
The chair hears none. The amendment is approved. Majority Leader?
Mr. Speaker, I move we recognize the Honorable Joet Garcia for added individual amendments. So move.
The Honorable Joet Garcia may continue.
Mr. Speaker, on page 2, section 4, line 11, between the words off-campus and educational, insert the phrase non-curricular, co-curricular,
What do you want
or
to find?
extracurricular. As amended, section 4 shall read, Section 4, coverage. This act shall apply to all local off-campus, non-curricular, co-curricular, or extracurricular educational activities undertaken by public and private educational institutions under the supervision of the Department of Education and the Commission on Higher Education. I so move, Mr. Speaker.
What does the distinguished sponsor say?
We accept, Mr. Speaker.
Majority Leader?
Mr. Speaker, the majority joins the sponsor in accepting the amendments.
Is there any objection? The chair hears none. The amendment is approved.
Mr.
The
Speaker,
Honorable Garcia may proceed.
On page 2, section 5, on line 16, between the words off-campus and educational, insert the phrase non-co-curricular, co-curricular, and extracurricular. On lines 16 to 17, between the words off-campus and educational, insert the phrase non-co-curricular, co-curricular, and extracurricular. On line 19, after the semicolon, insert the word or. On line 21, delete the entire paragraph B. On line 23, replace letter C with letter B. On lines 26 to 28, delete the entire first sentence. And on line 28, before the word no, delete the word in, and in lieu thereof, insert the phrase participation in any off-campus, non-curricular, co-curricular, and extracurricular activities shall be voluntary and in. As amended, Section 5 shall read as follows. Section 5, conditions for off-campus, non-curricular, co-curricular, and extracurricular educational activities. No off-campus, non-curricular, co-curricular, and extracurricular educational activities shall be undertaken unless they are A, relevant and aligned with the educational competencies of the curriculum, or B, necessary to the acquisition of relevant knowledge, skills, and values of the learners. Participation in any off-campus, non-curricular, co-curricular, or extracurricular activities shall be voluntary, and in no case shall the inability to participate in the off-campus activity constitute a failure to complete any requirement or in any way put the learner at a disadvantage. I so move, Mr. Speaker.
What does the Honorable Romulo say?
We accept, Mr. Speaker.
Majority Leader?
Mr. Speaker, the majority joins the distinguished sponsor.
Is there any objection to the amendment? The Chair hears none. The amendment is approved. The Honorable Garcia may proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On page 2, line 32 up to page 3, line 32, delete the entire provision of Section 6. I so move, Mr. Speaker.
What does the distinguished Romulo say?
We accept the amendment to delete the entire Section 6.
Majority Leader?
Mr. Speaker, the majority joins the distinguished sponsor.
Is there any objection? The Chair hears none. The amendment is approved. The Honorable Garcia may proceed.
On page 3, Section 7, Mr. Speaker, on line 34, after the word SEC or SEC period, replace the number 7 with the number 6. On line 23, between the words off and venues, delete the word off campus. On line 37, between the comma and the word relevant, insert the phrase the local government units or LGUs. And on line 40, insert the words non-curricular, co-curricular, or extracurricular before the word activities. On page 4, line 13, before the word off-campus, insert the phrase non-curricular, co-curricular, or extracurricular. As amended, the first paragraph of Section 6 shall read, Section 6, accreditation of venues and destinations. The DepEd and CHED, in consultation with the Department of Tourism, National Museum of the Philippines, National Historical Commission of the Philippines,
Yes.
National Commission for Culture and the Arts, the local government units or LGUs, and other relevant government agencies shall separately accredit the venues, destinations, and activities where the educational institutions under their respective jurisdictions may conduct, hold, or participate in off-campus, non-curricular, co-curricular, or extracurricular activities. In accrediting off-campus venues, destinations, and activities, the respective agencies that consider the following, and the last paragraph shall read, only venues, destinations, and activities accredited pursuant to this section may be considered by educational institutions in planning for and in implementing off-campus, non-curricular, co-curricular, or extracurricular educational activities. I so move, Mr. Speaker.
What does the distinguished sponsor say?
We accept, Mr. Speaker.
Majority Leader?
The majority joins the distinguished sponsor.
Is there any objection to the amendment? The Chair hears none. The amendment is approved. The Honorable Garcia may proceed.
On page 4, lines 15 to 26, delete the entire provision of Section 8. I so move, Mr. Speaker.
What does the distinguished sponsor say?
We accept, Mr. Speaker.
Majority Leader?
The majority joins the distinguished sponsor, Mr. Speaker.
Is there any objection to the amendment? The Chair hears none. The amendment is approved. The Honorable Garcia may proceed.
On page 4, Section 9, on line 28, after the word SEC period, replace the number 9 with the number 7. On line 28, between the words off-campus and educational, insert the phrase non-curricular, co-curricular, or extracurricular. On line 34, between the words the and or, delete the word program, and in lieu thereof, insert the phrase educational value, and on line 35, between the word curriculum and the comma, delete the word requirements, and in lieu thereof, insert the word enhancement. The amended provisions of Section 7 shall read, Section 7, promulgation of policies and guidelines for off-campus, non-curricular, co-curricular, or extracurricular educational activities. The DepEd and CHED shall separately promulgate specific policies and guidelines for the guidance of educational institutions, learners, parents or guardians, and other stakeholders involved in the implementation of off-campus educational activities. The policies and guidelines shall include the following: A, design of the off-campus activities with due regard to the educational value or curriculum enhancement or other learning objectives sought to be achieved, and taking into consideration the academic freedom of institutions of higher learning, provided that alternative or parallel activities shall be prepared for learners who are unable to participate in off-campus educational activities. I so move, Mr. Speaker.
What does the distinguished sponsor say?
We accept, Mr. Speaker.
Majority Leader.
The majority accepts the amendments of the sponsor, Mr. Speaker.
Is there any objection to the amendment? The chair hears none. The amendment is approved. The Honorable Garcia may proceed.
On page 5, section 10, on line 6, after the word SEC period, replace the number 10 with the number 8. On line 6, between the words off-campus and activities, insert the phrase non-curricular, co-curricular, or extracurricular. As amended, the first paragraph of section 8 shall read, Section 8, outsourcing of services for off-campus, non-curricular, co-curricular, or extracurricular activities. The conduct of off-campus educational activities shall primarily utilize the resources and transport equipment of the educational institutions concerned. In case of absence or inadequacy of such resources and equipment, educational institutions may outsource their needs from accredited service providers, provided that the overall responsibility for the off-campus activities shall remain with the educational institution, provided further that the service provider shall not be relieved of any responsibility in case of failure to exercise the degree of care and vigilance required under the circumstances, provided finally that in no case shall the off-campus activity be left to the control and management of the service provider. I so move, Mr. Speaker.
What does the distinguished sponsor say?
We accept, Mr. Speaker.
Majority Leader.
We, the majority, accept the amendments of the sponsor, Mr. Speaker.
Is there any objection to the amendment? The chair hears none. The amendment is approved. The Honorable Garcia may proceed.
On page 5, section 11, on line 40, after the word SEC period, replace the number 11 with the number 9. On line 44, between the words off-campus and educational, insert the phrase non-curricular, co-curricular, or extracurricular. On line 45, between the words destinations and accredited, insert the phrase as may be identified and. On line 47, after the acronym CHED, place a semicolon and insert the clause or an employee of an educational institution who shall conduct or organize an off-campus, non-curricular, co-curricular, or extracurricular activities without the express written consent of the educational institution where the participating learners belong. The amended provisions of Section 9 shall read, Section 9, Penal Provisions. Any violation of the provisions of this Act after due notice and hearing shall be penalized by the DepEd or CHED as herein provided. Letter A, an educational institution which conducts off-campus, non-curricular, co-curricular, or extracurricular educational activities outside those of campus venues and destinations as may be identified and accredited by the DepEd or CHED, or which engages the services of a service provider not accredited by the DepEd or CHED, or an employee of an educational institution who shall conduct or organize an off-campus, non-curricular, co-curricular, or extracurricular activities without the express written consent of the educational institution where the participating learners belong shall be punished by : I so move, Mr. Speaker.
What does the distinguished sponsor say?
We accept, Mr. Speaker.
Majority Leader.
Mr. Speaker, in behalf of the majority, we join the sponsor.
Is there any objection to the amendment? The chair hears none. The amendment is approved. The Honorable Garcia may proceed.
And finally, Mr. Speaker, for the last amendment, the succeeding sections 12 to 15 shall be renumbered accordingly. I so move, Mr. Speaker.
What does the distinguished sponsor say?
We accept, Mr. Speaker.
Majority Leader.
Mr. Speaker, in behalf of the majority, we join the sponsor.
Is there any objection to the amendment? The chair hears none. The amendment is approved. Majority Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I move we recognize the Honorable Franz Castro for her proposed individual amendments. So move, Mr. Speaker.
The Honorable Franz Castro is recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. So, on for my individual amendments, on Section 2, Declaration of Policy. So, may I insert the sentence, the state shall also at all times promote and respect the academic freedom and education institutions, teachers, and students.
What does the sponsor say?
We do not accept, Mr. Speaker.
Please proceed with further amendments, the Honorable Castro.
Again, on the Declaration of Policy, so delete the second paragraph, or delete the second paragraph, Mr. Chair, for the reason that it is not true that the activities outside the schools diminishes the security provided within its walls and subjects learners to safety concerns.
What does the sponsor say?
With all due respect to the proponent, we decline the amendment.
Unfortunately, the amendment is lost. The Honorable Franz Castro may proceed.
On page 1, after line 18, insert okay na po yun. And then with respect to the accreditation, so on page, propose to delete section 7.
With all due respect to the proponent, we decline said amendment.
Unfortunately, the amendment is lost. The Honorable Franz Castro may proceed with other amendments.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. That's all that I can amend in House Bill 8737.
Thank you. Thank you. Majority Leader.
Mr. Speaker, there being no more individuals who wish to give their amendments, Mr. Speaker, before I move to take up the House bill on second reading, I want to express a correctivia that after the vote, we will recognize the Honorable Castro for a manifestation regarding the said measure. So with this, Mr. Speaker, I move that we take up on second reading House Bill number 8737. But before that, I move we terminate the period of individual and committee amendments. So move, Mr. Speaker.
Is there any objection? The chair hears none. The period of committee and individual amendments is hereby closed. Majority Leader.
Mr. Speaker, again, I move we take up on second reading House Bill number 8737. So move, Mr. Speaker.
As many as are in favor of House Bill 8737, please say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, please say nay. The ayes have it. House Bill 8737 is approved on second reading as amended.
Mr. Speaker, I move we recognize the Honorable Castro for a manifestation. So moved, Mr. Speaker.
The Honorable Franz Castro is recognized for her manifestation.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Bagamat yung may mga provision dito na tinanggal po, especially yung Section 6, that enumerates the different venues and activities na pwede lang gawin sa mga off-campus duties or sa off-campus activities. Bagamat ito po ay may mga positive naman na ilan mga positive na inapprove naman ng sponsor. So meron lang po akong ay mamanifest doon sa ating kagalang-galang na imamanifest dahil unang-una po yung academic freedom po ay part yan nung whether it is pag-usapan po natin yung mga subject or it refers to academic, co-curricular or extracurricular. So palagay po ng representasyong ito, Mr. Speaker, kabilang po lahat sa academic freedom, yung lahat ng venue opportunities para sa mga estudyante natin na makapag-aral or matuto regardless kung saan po ito, sa classroom, sa school, sa komunidad, sa palengke man yan o kung saan po, ayan po ay part ng academic freedom. Pangalawa po, Mr. Speaker, sa Section 7, malilimitahan din po yung sinasabi natin academic freedom dun sa mga accreditation. Dahil alam naman po natin na kapag meron ng mga regulation on accreditation ay talagang tingin natin, ito rin ay sagka. Alam niyo po, Mr. Speaker, ang kinatawang pong ito ay dating guro at syempre po magulang din po ako na gusto ko rin magkaroon ng regulation kaugnay ng mga off-campus activities. Kagaya po niyan, katulad ng safety and procedure, it should be voluntary and it should be protected. Kasi na-experience ko po, Mr. Speaker, yung sa personal ko po, kapag hindi po sumasama sa mga educational trip, etc., ay binibigyan din po yan ng maraming assignments yung anak. Kaya hirap na hirap po yung mga bata. So, isa rin po ito siguro na maging regulations natin. At syempre po doon sa yung mga money-making venture po ng ilang mga schools, na kung saan ginagamit itong mga educational trips na ito at iba pang mga activities of campus para sa mga money-making venture po ng mga administration. So, ito lang po, Mr. Speaker, mataas po talaga yung aking yung aking pagtingin na dapat yung academic freedom ay mai-reflect dito sa ating House Bill 8737. Maraming salamat, Mr. Speaker.
Majority Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I move that we consider House Bill...
Mr. Speaker, point of order.
Please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Hinggil sa tinatalakay nating panukalang batas, na ito po ay ni-refer sa Committee on Basic Education and Culture. At ayon sa Section 28 ng ating rules, all matters directly and principally relating to preschool, kindergarten, primary and secondary education, science high schools, etc. On the other hand, yung pinapanukalang batas ay sumasaklaw rin sa higher education, which is supposedly tackled by another committee, Higher and Technical Education, Committee on Higher and Technical Education, which pertains to all matters directly and principally relating to higher education and post-secondary technical vocational education. So, Mr. Speaker, ayon sa ating rules, higher and technical public hearings, the committees and subcommittees may hold public hearings on any measure, provided that the measure is made available to the public and notices are issued in writing, and as far as practicable through electronic mail, etc. So, ang concern ng kinatawang ito ay kung nagkaroon ba ng karampatang pagtatalakay doon sa mga stakeholders sa usapin sa higher education. Not only those concerning sa stakeholders sa Komite ng Basic Education and Culture. Mr. Chair.
The Majority Leader will respond.
Mr. Speaker, I move to suspend for a few minutes.
Session suspended.
Dapat sa ano na tayo?
Session resumes. Majority Leader.
Mr. Speaker, we note the manifestation of the Honorable Gaite.
Manifestation is hereby noted. Majority Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I move that we consider House Bill number 8897 under the Committee Report 810 and request the Secretary General to read the title of the bill.
Is there any objection? The Chair hears none. Motion is approved and the Secretary General is directed to read the title of House Bill 8897.
House Bill 8897, an act declaring April 27 of every year a special non-working public holiday throughout the country to be known as Lapu-Lapu Day, in commemoration of the victory of Lapu-Lapu and his men over the Spaniards led by Ferdinand Magellan in the historic Battle of Mactan on April 27, 1521, repealing for the purpose of Public Act number 11040.
Majority Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I move to recognize the Honorable X.J. Romualdo of the Long District of Camiguin to sponsor the said bill.
The Honorable Romualdo is recognized to sponsor the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I have the honor to sponsor for the plenary's consideration, House Bill number 8897, as contained in Committee Report 810. I respectfully move that the explanatory note of the said measure be adopted as our sponsorship speech.
Is there any objection? The Chair hears none. The explanatory note is hereby adopted as the privileged speech of the House Bill 8897. Majority Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I move to open the period of interpellation.
Is there any objection? The chair hears none. The period of interpellation is open.
Mr. Speaker, there being no member who wishes to interpellate, I move to terminate the period of interpellation.
Is there any objection? The chair hears none. The period of interpellation is hereby closed.
Mr. Speaker, I move that we open the period of amendments.
Is there any objection? The chair hears none. The period of amendments is open.
Mr. Speaker, there being no other committee amendments, I move that we now proceed to consider the individual amendments.
Is there any objection? The chair hears none. The motion is approved and the period of amendments is hereby closed.
Mr. Speaker, there being no committee amendments, I move that we now proceed to the consideration of individual amendments.
Is there any objection? The chair hears none. The motion is approved.
Mr. Speaker, there being no member who wishes to introduce individual amendments, I move that we close the period of individual amendments.
Is there any objection? The chair hears none. Motion is approved and the period of individual amendments is hereby closed. Majority
Mr.
Leader.
Speaker, I move to close the period of amendments.
Is there any objection? The chair hears none. The period of amendments is hereby closed. Majority Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I move that we vote on second reading House Bill number 8897. So move, Mr. Speaker.
As many as are in favor of House Bill 8897, please say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, please say nay. The ayes have it. House Bill 8897 is hereby approved on second reading. Majority Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I move for a few minutes of suspension.
Session suspended.
Ha? Andun naman.
Session resumes. Majority Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I move that we resume consideration of House Bill RBH2 under Committee Report 735 and Secretary General be directed to read the title of the bill.
Is there any objection? The chair hears none. Motion is approved and the Secretary General is directed to read the title of RBH2.
RBH2, Resolution of both Houses proposing amendments to certain economic provisions of the 1987 Constitution of the Republic of the Philippines, particularly on Articles 2, 14, and 16.
Majority Leader.
Mr. Speaker, the parliamentary status of the bill is it's under the period of sponsorship debate, and I move to recognize the Honorable Alfredo Garbin of Ako Bicol Party List to sponsor the said bill.
The chairperson of the Constitutional Amendments Committee is the Honorable Garbin is recognized to sponsor the measure.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Majority Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I move to recognize the Honorable Ria Vergara of the 3rd District of Nueva Ecija to her interpellation.
The Honorable Ria Vergara is recognized for her Zoom interpellation.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon. Would the honorable sponsor of Republic of RBH2 be willing to answer some clarificatory questions?
Willingly, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Speaker, we in Congress look to the insertion of these 5 words, unless otherwise provided by law, as providing flexibility to the restrictive economic provisions of our Constitution. As our Honorable Chair Garbin said, it's some sort of positive signaling to foreign investors that our country is open and available for foreign business. No more restrictions. We are communicating that our country is now taking out the do not enter sign for investors who find our laws too restrictive. However, Mr. Speaker, I am concerned that these 5 words will result to Filipinos no longer knowing exactly what our rights are when it comes to the control and ownership of our natural resources and public utilities. At least now, for instance, we all know that the 60-40 is the rule of the land when it comes to the use of our resources and the ownership of utilities. that is explicitly clear. The phrase endangers the safeguards of our 1987 Constitution has put in place for our national patrimony and economy. And while I agree with our honorable sponsor that we want our Constitution to be resilient to challenges so we are able to seize opportunities when they come, I also believe that our Constitution must be clear, transparent, and participatory. And so my question, honorable sponsor, Mr. Speaker, is how do you, sir, envision balancing interests which are upholding our national identity and patrimony on the one hand, and on the other, the ultimate intent of opening up our economy to higher foreign participation and control? How do you propose to mitigate the risks that accompany the possible full liberalization of some of our critical sectors?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The question relates to the principles and provisions of the Constitution. Now, the Constitution allows balance between two important values. Number one is the Filipino interest, and number two is the economic prosperity. Now, under Section 19, Article 2 of the 1987 Constitution, it states that the state shall develop a self-reliant and independent national economy effectively controlled by Filipinos. Section 19, inasmuch as a constitutional principle, each constitutional principle or provisions and principles should be read in conjunction with other provisions of the Constitution to attain a balance of economic development. In particular, the Constitution has also Article 9 or Article 2, Section 9, which reads, the state shall promote a just and a dynamic social order that will enjoy the prosperity and independence of the nation and free the people from poverty through policies that provide adequate social services, promote full employment, and a rising standard of living and an improved quality of life for all. So thus, the state's goal is not only to absolutely ensure Filipino control, but to create a balance between that and national prosperity. One constitutional principle should not be treated as a superior over the other. For this purpose, we are adding flexibilities in the amendments to allow quick changes so our policies can adjust according to the needs of our circumstance, always considering and without needing to derogate from any valued constitutional principle. So in other words, Mr. Speaker, just as the state cannot disregard Section 19, it is also cannot disregard Section 9, any application of which is limited by the other and with good reason.
So, Mr. Speaker, from the response of our honorable chair, can I safely assume then that once this amendment passes the lower house, passes the Senate, and is placed for ratification and is approved, it is possible that our natural resources and our public utilities, if Congress so deems, might now become fully owned by foreign companies? That is a possibility, sir?
Well, the possibility is that the incorporation of the phrase unless otherwise provided by law in Article 12, Section 3 of the 1987 Constitution, the possibility is that Congress may increase or decrease the maximum land area allowed to be leased by private corporations and associations. Congress may extend the period of lease, and Congress may add another exception to holding alienable lands of public domain aside from lease. And Congress may also lift the restriction against holding of lands of public domain by corporations or association. Now, with regard to Section 11, Article 12, which refers to public utilities, Congress may allow to extend the granting of franchise, certificate, etc. to non-Filipino citizens. Congress may increase or decrease the Filipino ownership requirement, qualified corporations and associations, and Congress may not authorize a franchise, certificate, etc. to be exclusive in character or extend the period to more than 50 years. So that is the implication of the incorporation of the phrase unless otherwise provided by law in those specific provision to which I have mentioned. If ever this will be approved by the sovereign Filipino people.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, not too long ago, towards the end of 2019, there was a House resolution and the Senate investigation on the 40% stake of China's State Grid Corp in the National Grid Corporation, the company in charge of all the major transmission lines of our country. The issue of the Senate investigation was Chinese interference in our energy sector. The Senate was concerned about our country's national security, and Senator Gatchalian even promised that the power grid's operation would be closely monitored and would remain in the hands of Filipinos. I'm worried, Mr. Speaker, that with this amendment, we are clearly changing this long-standing policy. Does the economic benefit outweigh the national interest?
Well, when you speak of national interest or specifically the control of national economy, note that the national economy and industry is not composed of a single entity. To rephrase, a single company does not comprise the whole of the national economy or the whole of a certain industry. What the Constitution is guarding against foreign control of our national economy or a specific industry imbued with public interest is not foreign control of a particular company within an industry and which contributes to the national economy. So I repeat that national economy and industry is not composed of a single entity. What the Constitution abhors are those foreign practices and foreign practices and trade practices that are unfair to Filipinos.
So do I take it then, Mr. Speaker, honorable sponsor, that vital installations like transmission facilities, power generating facilities, we will endeavor to keep that under the control of Filipino investors, the Filipino government, and not private foreign entities?
Well, to begin with, Mr. Speaker, the incorporation of the phrase unless otherwise provided by law comes with it neither a standard nor detail as of yet. And therefore, it is subject to legislations by the next Congress. And therefore, when we enact legislations, whether lifting or relaxing those restrictions enshrined in our Constitution, we will always consider what is best for our country, and in consideration thereof, paramount of which is national security, national sovereignty, and best of all, the interests of or for the benefits of the Filipino people.
Thank you, Mr. Sponsor. It's reassuring to know that our national security is still of paramount interest. I go to my next question, Mr. Speaker, honorable sponsor. Electricity, water, access to the internet, these are all basic services that should be provided to Filipinos with consideration of our ability to pay and according to our development needs. Industries as vital as this to the economy should not be turned over to private foreign interests, whose of course number one priority will be profit. As an example, government should develop a national plan for a state-supported energy sector to fulfill the promise of sufficient, affordable, and efficient electricity for all Filipinos. What I'm proposing, Mr. Speaker, is for government to come back into the energy sector the way they did before EPIRA happened. Mr. Speaker, the Philippines was the very first Asian country to tap geothermal power in 1977 with a 3 megawatt plant in Leyte and a larger commercial plant, 110 megawatt, in Tiwi Field, Albay. Our country, up until 2017, was the second largest geothermal energy producer worldwide, according to International Geothermal Associates. We were second only to the United States. But in 2018, we were overtaken by Indonesia in terms of geothermal power capacity. Indonesia's Ministry of State-Owned Enterprises created a holding company made up of 3 state-owned companies to develop and operate their geothermal capacity and power plants. My question, Mr. Speaker, is, should we not consider these kinds of government intervention policies state-owned enterprises for our vital industries before we liberalize these sectors?
Well, Mr. Speaker, if you will look at the sectors of our economy, one of the restrictions or one of the foreign equity restrictions is imposed upon the power industry. It says in our Constitution that when you speak of oil, gas, electricity, the foreign equity limitation is only 40%. And that is why in all economic literature presented to us by experts, even by OECD, I have a study here presented by Fernando Mitsura and Caroline Rollet. They are authors and economists and policy analysts in the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. They said that foreign equity limitations as determinants of foreign direct investment is #1 in their list. And you speak of limiting the participation of foreign equity in those industries, it will necessarily cause statutory barrier and operate to influence investors' choice among different locations. In fact, they said that a policy change from full restrictiveness to full liberalization would increase foreign direct investment stocks by about 25%. And to add more to that, in a 2019 study by the Organization of the Economic Cooperation and Development, it measured the restrictiveness of the economies to foreign direct investment and ranked the Philippines as the most restrictive in Southeast Asian region. In 2019, data from the World Bank also shows that the FDI net inflow of Vietnam and Indonesia, countries with relatively young populations such as ours, have already surpassed the Philippines' FDI net inflow, which may be correlated to their economies being less restrictive. So, therefore, the more we retain this foreign equity limitations in our Constitution, the more that we will not improve those sectors of our economy. Because, as the investor said, if the door is closed, then you cannot invite any investor. But even a signal of reform will significantly increase the flow of capital through foreign direct investment.
Thank you, honorable sponsor. It seems that you did not fully comprehend. Maybe I should make my question clearer. My question, Mr. Sponsor, is I was wondering, might it not be a good idea that before we liberalize these vital sectors, for instance, public utilities, that we consider government policies where the government, like what they did in Indonesia, the state-owned enterprises, what it came in and developed their geothermal resource. Are we then going to allow just foreign investors to develop our natural resources? That was the question Mr. Speaker, honorable sponsor, should we not consider government policy state-owned enterprises for our vital industries the way it used to be before EPIRA was implemented, so that we can be the ones to enjoy the fruits of the resources in our country? Might it not be a better course to support Filipino companies or even allow the government to once again enter geothermal generation so that we do not need foreign direct investors to be the ones to develop this for us the way Indonesia is doing it now? They're using state-owned enterprises to develop their geothermal resources.
The present circumstance points to the preferred choice of Filipino. In fact, the Constitution states that in the development, exploration, and utilization of our natural resources, which is under the control and supervision of the government, preferred ho yung ating mga kababayan, yung Filipino. It's just that infrastructure required in these sectors of the economy is generally capital intensive. Yun nga ho yung problema. These are areas that are underinvested. Underinvested because this is a capital intensive sectors of our society. And when there is insufficient local capital to fund the much needed modernization, allowing more foreign investment is a logical proposition. In the case of electricity, we need to increase our generation capacity to address the rising demand for power and to back up the country's growing economy with high quality and reliable energy. Sa ngayon ho talaga, pabor ho yung industriya at yung sektor ng ekonomiya sa ating mga kababayan. Pero ho, dahil capital intensive yung sektor ng ekonomiya na yon, ay kulang ho yung nagpa-participate. Mabibilang mo lang ho sa ilang kumpanya o pamilya are participating in those sectors of our economy and in the areas of national patrimony.
So, Mr. Speaker, it's fair to say po na panahon na baka pwedeng amendahan ng EPIRA para makapasok muli ang gobyerno sa pagpapatayo ng mga generating facilities nang sa ganon kapag ang gobyerno po ang nagpatayo, basta makover niya yung cost kahit walang profit, ayos na. Whereas pag private company ang nagtatayo, kailangan mabawi nila ang kanilang perang ipinasok at kumita pa. Ang aking sana bago natin buksan ng ating ekonomiya, we consider to allow state-owned enterprises, especially in vital industries like energy and water. I go to my next question, Mr. Speaker. Would the Honorable Chair agree that while RBH2 could result in flexibility, it is equally possible for it to result to unpredictability, particularly for foreign and even domestic investors who now have to rely on Congress to pass laws that could be changed more easily depending on the policy direction of an administration? Kasi po, madalas po niyong sinasabi na the insertion of these 5 words will allow for flexibility. But might this same flexibility be the result of instability? Pag pabago-bago po yung mga batas na ilalabas. Depende po pag tayo po, nagbabago tayo ng Pangulo every 6 years. At pag nagbago yung Pangulo, kadalasan nagbabago din yung policy direction. So might that create a more unstable investment environment and even scare away foreign investors more?
Well, that's the beauty of RBH2. It provides flexibility on the part of Congress to enact legislation that will respond to the present economic and technological condition. The beauty of it is that whenever the circumstance or the data that provides to us, we will act on the said data. In the same way that we acted in passing, in proposing the Trade Liberalization Act, in pursuing the fiscal incentive and the Public Service Act. This is also the intention of the RBH2, to be attuned to the needs of time. Now, as to the safeguard itself is legislation, because I believe that legislation will always be based on the sound judgment of the Congress, to which it passed and signed by the President into law. So this is the safeguard legislation.
So, Mr. Chair, honorable sponsor, you're not worried that every 6 years we have a new administration. Every 3 years we vote in new congressmen, that this flexibility might result to more instability. But that is something you consider too, or you think that it's not really something that we should worry about?
Can you please repeat the question, Congresswoman Vergara?
Yes, Mr. Chair. You said that the flexibility is actually the asset or the beauty of this amendment. I agree, while it will allow flexibility, will allow us to respond faster, I also worry that the flexibility might result to instability, because every time there's a new administration, every 6 years, it's possible that policy direction changes. As an example, from the Aquino administration that had very positive ties with the U.S. government, President Duterte did a pivot towards China, so that's a change in foreign policy direction. I fear that these 5 words might result, the flexibility that it provides might cause more instability, and as a result might actually be more of a deterrent to foreign investors.
Well, that's the province of legislative power. When you speak of legislative power, that is the power to enact laws and to alter or repeal them when the common good so requires. So that's always the safeguard. Whenever we enact legislations here, or when we pass or modify or alter any legislations, it is always grounded, or we're always guided by the common good, public interest. And so that is always the safeguard. So I'm not worried at all.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. In a previous interpellation of Senior Deputy Majority Leader Remulla, he talked about the parity clause. And like you, I was not born during that time either. And I don't think neither was Congressman Remulla. But in 1947, former President Rojas on March 6 said in his campaign to ratify the Parity Amendment in our 1935 Constitution, he said, and I quote, "Capital is very shy. Capital will not go to any country where it is not welcome. The main reason for approving this Parity Amendment is so that the Philippines may be able to acquire within the shortest time possible the scientific and technological equipment and skills that are necessary to make our country a productive industrial country," end quote. So, Mr. Speaker, this RBH2 and the proposal that we have is, one, to develop our country from an agricultural to a more progressive industrial economy, and 2, because we lack capital to build key industries, specifically in mining and utilities. So the objectives of RBH2 do not seem too different from the objectives of the proposed constitutional amendment of the Parity Amendment way back in 1946. Do you agree, Mr. Sponsor?
Pasensya na ho, hindi ako familiar masyado nung parity agreement in 1946.
Okay, in a nutshell, yung parity agreement po, they wanted to amend our 1935 Constitution to allow Americans to have the same rights to our public utilities and natural resources as Filipinos. There was, because in the 1935 Constitution, there was also the 60-40 sharing, but with the Parity Amendment, they said for 28 years, American investors, American citizens will have the same rights as Filipino citizens to natural resources of the Philippines and to operate and own public utilities. And that was the Parity Amendment. It was only effective for 28 years, and it was only for one country, the United States. And it didn't achieve all it claimed to do. It actually hampered our industrial development, as we see today. My question then is, aren't we subjecting our economy in a more precarious position by pursuing amendments similar to the Parity Clause that are targeted and will allow an even greater degree of foreign control in more of our industries? Because now it's not just natural resources and public utilities, it's also mass media, education, advertising. So my question, Mr. Chair, is if the Parity Clause of 1946 did not help our country at all, and it was for a fixed amount of time, only 28 years, and only opened our country to one nation, the United States, di po ba mas delikado itong RBH2 kasi now we're open to any country, I guess, that we have positive relationships with, and there's no time limit of 28 years. Although, again, as you mentioned, we can legislate and we can change as we deem necessary as we go forward.
In answer to your question, Mr. Speaker, I've stated earlier that the incorporation of the phrase "unless otherwise provided by law" does not come with it standard nor details as of yet, but it imposes a condition. The condition is passing of a legislation. So meaning this is totally different from the one that you have compared, the Parity Law of 1946. Malayo ho yung comparison dito. What it provides is flexibility from inflexibility of those constitutional provisions to which it is attached. From rigidity to becoming flexible. Wala pa hong detalye, wala pa hong standard ito. So meaning, if the condition like passing of a law and signed by the President in order for it to become a law, it will negate the restriction to which it is attached. Like, for example, the 60-40 foreign equity participation in the public utilities. But as to whether we will increase the foreign equity participation to say 49, 60, 70, or 100%, that is up to the next Congress to decide.
Mr. Sponsor, I think the question being asked of you is that there was an analogy between the 1946 Parity Amendment because it came also as an amendment to the 1935 Constitution. The interpellator, the Honorable Ria Vergara, is asking whether or not it has some analogy because, according to her, the promises of the 1946 Parity Agreement did not come into fruition. And considering that RBH2 now promises also conditions for the future use of the Congress, she's a little bit wary if that will still be the case, as in the case of the Parity Amendment. That was the question.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have the same answer.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Sponsor, the parity amendment, I fear, is very, if we should use the phrase unless otherwise provided by law to allow for majority ownership of our natural resources, public utilities, mass media, educational institutions, I fear it would be very similar to the parity clause of 1946. And that is really my concern. I mean, there's a saying that those who do not know their history are condemned to repeat it. And I do not want our country to repeat that history in the 21st century. My last question, Mr. Speaker,
Well,
Mr.
just
Chair,
a brief
is,
response,
Do we have-
Mr. Speaker, to the query and manifestation of Congresswoman Vergara. You know, the restriction in the foreign investment, as we found it in Article 12, 14, and 16 of the 1987 Constitution, is an outdated nationalistic concept. The circumstance that we have now is different from the prevailing circumstance that we had in the 1946 or in the year 1946. And this nationalistic concept had been overtaken by technological advancement. For example, in foreign restriction in public utilities, our country is forced to rely on undercapitalized Filipino business in the exploitation of natural resources. It would have been good if only the Philippines is able to collect those royalties or appropriate royalties in those underserved or underinvested areas of our national patrimony. The restriction on the employment of foreign professionals is likewise deprive Filipinos of knowledge transfer from their foreign counterpart as well as employment abroad. The limitations of ownership in education institution is surely obsolete, whereas in mass media, ganun din po. We have CNN, BBC, broadcasted everywhere in all of our cable suppliers. Foreign publications are being sold in all the stands in all malls, supermarkets. So meaning the limitations of foreign equity, I think, is a nationalistic concept that is already outdated.
Mr. Speaker, I don't think patriotism or nationalism is a concept that can be outdated. I think it's a principle that as a Filipino, I'm proud to say I believe in. And I'm not yet certain on what side of the fence I will fall on RPH2, and that's why, Mr. Speaker, Honorable Sponsor, I'm asking this clarificatory question so I can make an informed decision when it comes to voting. My next question, Mr. Speaker, is, are we familiar or have we studied what the optimal percentage in terms of equity sharing might be proposed by Congress should this pass and be amended into our Constitution in terms of, let's say, utilization of natural resources? Do we have any idea if we will be going against the 60-40? The assumption is it's restrictive, so it will be definitely more than 60-40. Is there any study on what the ideal sharing would be that will be both good for our country and good for the foreign direct investors?
Well, Mr. Speaker,
Are those some things that we still need to?
Mr. Speaker, in response to the query, the global average for foreign equity participation in the sectors in mining, oil, gas, electricity, waste management, water supply, transportation, telecom, media, education, accounting, range from 68 to 99%. But we in the Philippines, we limit most of the public utilities on equity participation to 40%. Again, uulitin ko po. Sinabi ko lang yung global average of foreign equity participation in those sectors of our economy, but I will repeat that this proposal to incorporate the phrase "unless otherwise provided by law" does not come with it a standard nor specifics or details as of yet.
So, thank you, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Chair, it's the global average is 68 to 99%.
That is correct.
Yes. Thank you, sir. I go to my next question, Mr. Speaker. In areas of paramount interest like the media and education, may I know what the rationale is for allowing foreigners to invest in them, considering that these industries should shape our national identity and the future of Filipino children? Shouldn't we make those decisions and not foreign investors? I speak specifically of education and mass media. Mr. Speaker, I ask this because as a member of the Committee in Creative Industry, our Filipino talents, the Filipino talents, we can't compete with foreign talents, even in our own country. And we're looking of ways and means with Chair Toff de Venecia on how to maximize exposure for Filipino talents. And so now, with this proposal of allowing media now to be controlled majority by foreigners, might this even worsen the already sad state of our Filipino homegrown talents?
Well, in the case of mass media, it is also to be reviewed the 100% requirement in its ownership and management. As I've said earlier, given the reality that foreign publications and foreign networks like the CNN, the BBC are already allowed to be broadcasted, and that foreign publications are freely sold in the newsstand. Ano ho yung kinakatakot natin dito? Lahat ng cable televisions natin, mayroon CNN, meron BBC. Pumunta ka sa iba't ibang mall, yung mga stand nila, mabibili mo mga foreign publications. And therefore, I think this is one thing that has to be reviewed on. Now, the fear of foreign influence through control of television, radio, and newspaper is for now unfounded, since the deterioration of knowledge and information dissemination has long since enabled access to global audiences. Yun nga ho, sinabi ko kanina, CNN, BBC, lahat ng cable television natin, meron na. Foreign media is already here. There is no denying their influence on the Filipino. As an internal issue, industry representatives observe that competition from foreign journalists and broadcasters could possibly provide the necessary competition to uplift the standard ng pagre-report po at na pagbibigay ng balita sa ating taong bayan. Doon naman ho sa edukasyon, siguro maganda rin ho na kung i-open up natin yung management and ownership ng sektor ng ating edukasyon, ay gayahin natin yung practice sa ibang bansa. Like by invitation lamang in Singapore, China, Hong Kong, they only invite the elite universities. And in that way, we provide a choice for our Filipinos and other students na wala hong masyadong pera na makapag-aral sa ibang bansa sa matataas na universidad na napakamahal ng tuition at standard of living. We can afford and provide a lower standard of living here in the Philippines and also provide a lower tuition fee. Opening up the economy to foreign investment, to education, should never be considered a sell-out of our position as a diminishing of our priority to further our constituents' education. In fact, it even creates an avenue for an improvement. Research and collaborations between foreign and local universities and colleges and local industries is one thing that is being ignored at the moment, with Philippine higher education institution slipping in international rankings due to poor citations and counts and lack of research infrastructure. Allowing the entry of foreign universities could lead to positive spillovers in knowledge creation, technology transfer, and the like.
Thank you, Mr. Sponsor, Mr. Speaker. However, when you speak of all this, we will always protect our educational institutions that have been there and not allow them to unnecessarily compete with these foreign educational investors who might have deeper pockets, right? I mean, we're not going to wake up one day and find that almost all of our educational institutions are now being run by foreigners because they're the ones with the capacity and the funding to do it properly. We will protect our existing universities always.
I totally agree with you, Congresswoman Vergara.
My last question, Mr. Speaker, is foreigners, especially today, we're one of the last Asian countries in terms of the rollout of our vaccine program, which has already begun. But they say that in Asia, we will be one of the last to recover from the pandemic. And I worry that with this amendment, foreigners can come in and there's no limit to what they can invest in now. There's no more 40% cap. Could you give me an idea, sir? You're a lawyer, I am not. What kind of laws might be proposed so that we are not naman inundated with foreign funds, that we're able to protect our small, medium, our MSMEs, so that we don't find ourselves as second-class citizens in our own country? Could you give me an example of a law, for instance, that we could propose should this amendment be approved to protect Filipino entrepreneurs from the entry of foreign investors?
I cannot provide you specific law or a concept of law that will, but what I can say is that whenever we liberalize and open up and increase foreign equity participation, I am sure that they will be all subject to all our regulatory laws, such as environmental laws, protection of labor, international labor standards, protections of SMME. Those are the things that we have to keep in mind. We will not sell out our national sovereignty. We will always keep into consideration, and paramount of which is national sovereignty, national interest, and always for the benefit of the Filipino people.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. That is what I was hoping you would say. I know we've spoken privately about this, and I spoke to you about the rice tarification law and how when we liberalized the rice industry, we made sure that there's a 10 billion fund for our rice farmers to make sure that they can and improve production so that they are not at the mercy of the imported rice coming in. In closing, Mr. Speaker, I would just like to make a manifestation. As Honorable Chair of Ways and Means, Congressman Salceda said, and I quote, "I am under no illusion that RBH2 is a magic wand for all our problems, but it is a necessary beginning," end quote. Mr. Speaker, Honorable Chair, like Chair Salceda and Congressman Kimbo and yourself, I also believe that easing foreign restrictions alone will not result to shared prosperity, inclusive growth, and poverty alleviation unless it is part of a larger government plan that also addresses our country's infrastructure, policy stability, corruption, high power rates, tax regulation, and government bureaucracy. I hope that as we consider RBH2, we will also address those aforementioned areas. Thank you very much, Honorable Sponsor, Mr. Speaker, for this chance to ask clarificatory questions and make this manifestation. Good afternoon.
Thank you, Congresswoman Vergara, and let me state that in seeking to resolve those issues that you have mentioned, along with it, we should also encourage the inflow of foreign direct investment by lifting the restrictive economic provisions of the Constitution.
The Majority Leader.
Mr. Speaker, the next member who wishes to interpellate our distinguished sponsor is lady from Party List Act Teachers. I move that we recognize Representative Franz Castro.
Representative Franz Castro is recognized.
Maraming salamat, Mr. Speaker. Ang atin po bang kagalang-galang na sponsor ay willing na sumagot sa ilang mga paglilinaw ng representasyong ito kaugnay ng ating pinag-uusapang panukalang batas.
Handa na akong sumagot.
So sisimulan ko, Mr. Speaker, doon sa mga attempts ng kongresong ito kaugnay noong charter change. So before RBH2, there had been 6 previous attempts to change the Constitution. 3 of them included amendments to the economic provisions. One in 1997 during former President Ramos' time. This is the PIRMA, People's Initiative for Reform, Modernization, and Action, which was struck down by the SC as unconstitutional. Second, in 1999, Project Concord on Economic Provisions. In 2001, a proposal to change from a presidential to a parliamentary system, which is a French version. It died a quiet death when former President Arroyo did not support it. In 2006, to change again to a parliamentary federal system, which is struck down by the Supreme Court as unconstitutional. Number 5, in 2009, a proposal by former President Arroyo allies that would give an equal vote for congressmen and senators in Constituent Assembly in joint session and a joint vote. It was withdrawn in the face of widespread opposition, including from the Senate. And lastly, in 2015, the House initiated Joint Resolution number 1 with almost exactly the same provision on economy. So, Mr. Speaker, yung mga attempt po ito na pagbabago ng ating mga constitution, talagang ang dami na pong attempt, no? Pero hindi, tingin po ng representanting ito, hindi inosente ang pagsisingit ng phrase na unless otherwise provided by law. Dahil nangangahulugan ito ng pagpapababa ng proteksyon para sa mga lokal na industriya, lokal na produkto, Pilipino consumer ng mga batayang produkto at serbisyo. At sinasabi din at nangangahulugan din po ito noong pagbabago ng foreign ownership. Buti na lang, no, tinanggal na yung land ownership. Issue on public utility ownership and education institutions and mass media. So, Mr. Speaker, ginong sponsor, ako po ay magpo-focus na lamang po doon sa mga sinasabi po ng mga proponents ng RBH2 tungkol doon sa ang atin po raw na constitution ay very restrictive and very protectionist. Okay? Bakit kailangan natin to, Mr. Speaker? Ito ba yung trend sa pangkalahatan? So sinasabi maraming bansa ay bukas na bukas sa foreign investment at hindi sila masyadong protectionist na kagaya ng konstitusyon ng Pilipinas. So hindi po nababanggit itong mga sinasabi nating bukas na mga ekonomiya ng ibang bansa katulad ng Vietnam and China. Sinasabi po natin na yung China and Vietnam have opened up their economies now, but they are leaving one very important fact, that these countries first implemented nationalist industrialization and genuine land reform na hindi pa po natatamo ng ating bansa hanggang sa kasalukuyan. Meron po ako, Mr. Speaker, ginong sponsor na PowerPoint presentation na kung saan pinabubulaanan natin na ang mga bansa ay very open at hindi sila nagre-restrict at yung protectionism na konsepto ay wala doon sa ating sa iba't ibang mga bansa. In fact, Mr. Speaker, ginong sponsor, parami ngayon ang ating iba't ibang mga bansa at nag-geared toward protectionism sa kanilang ekonomiya at sa kanilang bansa.
Pwede
Okay,
ho
may
makuha ko
request,
muna kung ano yung, Mr. Speaker, pwede ko po muna makuha kung ano yung tanong ng ginagalangan nating Congresswoman Franz Castro.
Mr. Speaker, wala pa po akong tanong. Introduction
Magpe-present
pa lang
lang ho kayo.
Okay. Magpipresent lang po ako kasi ito po yung madalas na naririnig ko po sa mga proponents na yung ating constitution ay very restrictive. At papakita ko po, Mr. Speaker, ano ba yung pandaigdigang trend patungong proteksionismo sa iba't ibang mga bansa. Next slides. Maraming bansa na ang nagpapatupad ng protectionist measures gaya ng mga batas at regulasyon para pakitirin ang inbound foreign investments, non-tariff barriers gaya ng import quotas o embargoes, mas agresibong financial at di-financial na suporta para sa lokal na MSMEs at mga susing industriya at iba pa. Ang nasabing protectionist measures, Mr. Speaker, ay may katangiang short-term at long-term. COVID-related, gaya ng pagsiguro sa produksyon at supply ng pagkain, PPE at medical equipment and devices, at iba pa. The priority today is to produce more in Europe and France. Ito po yung sinabi ng presidente ng France na si President Macron tungkol sa layuning abutin ang self-sufficiency sa medical equipment sa loob ng 1 taon. There are also measures implemented by Asian and Pacific countries buong 2018, Mr. Speaker. 27 for liberalization, 11 for restriction, regulation, 3 yung neutral. Buong 2019, 32 for liberalization, 7 for restriction, and 1 for neutral. At nitong Enero hanggang Oktubre 2020, 19 for liberalization, 9 for restriction, and 1 neutral. Ano po ang ibig sabihin nito, Mr. Speaker? Kumukonti ang pinatutupad ng mga bansa sa Asia-Pasipiko para sa mga foreign direct investment noong 2020. At hindi pa nga natapos ang taon, dumami pa ang mga pinatutupad na patungong proteksionismo. Samantala, halos consistent ang bagong neutral policies. Ito po yung Asia-Pacific Trade and Investment Trends 2020 and 2021. UN Economic and Social Commission for Asia and the Pacific o yung UNESCAP. Measures implemented by Asian and Pacific countries like Mr. Speaker sa Korea, sa Nepal, Australia at Russia, 1 protectionist measures each. In India and New Zealand, 2 protectionist measures each. In Vietnam, 3 protectionist measures, and in Japan, 4 protectionist measures. Sabing ganon doon sa pag-aaral ng UNESCAP, new restrictive measures in 2020 were introduced in Australia, India, Japan, New Zealand, and the Russian Federation. These restrictions has all been implemented since and in response to the COVID-19 crisis and have focused on intensified screening of foreign investments and on protecting domestic capacity in the healthcare, pharmaceutical, and medical devices industry segments. Mr. Speaker, ayon din po sa UNESCAP, bumabagal globally and at regionally ang pagpasok ng mga bansa sa International Investment Agreements o yung tinatawag nating IIAs simula noong 2017. Pakaunti ng pakaunti ang bagong IIAs o multilateral treaties or agreements. Sa buong mundo, pinakamababa sa loob ng 37 na taon ang kabuang bilang ng mga IIAs in force. As of August 20, meron lamang pong 2,662. Samantala, 3 taon na nauungusan ang newly signed IIAs ng terminated IIAs o yung mga natapos o sinara o pinutol ng mga agreements. Ganito rin ang trend ng pagliit ng bilang ng termination ng bilateral investment treaties sa buong mundo. Ayon naman po, Mr. Speaker, sa mas updated na datos ng UN Conference on Trade and Development o yung UNCTAD, February 2021, 52 countries and the European Union took 96 investment policy measures in the review period. May 2020 to December 2020, nearly half of these measures introduced new regulations or restrictions for investment, the highest ratio in almost 2 decades. Mga halimbawa nito, Mr. Speaker, yung sa Austria, Investment Control Act, considerable expansion of prior approval requirements for FDI. Finland, France, Germany, Hungary, Korea, New Zealand, Poland, Russia, Slovenia, stricter and or broader investment screening regimes. Sa Italy naman po, expanded the special power regime in strategic sectors that require prior approval for any foreign investments. Iba pa pong mga halimbawa, Mr. Speaker, sa Japan, they lowered the threshold for prior notification to 1% from 10% for foreign investment in listed Japanese companies relevant for national security. Sa Kenya naman po, Mr. Speaker, local participation requirements in various industries, including insurance, telecommunications, and ICT service, kailangang may Kenyan citizen ownership sa mga ito. Iba pa pong mga halimbawa, Mr. Speaker, sa Oman, list of activities that are prohibited for foreign investors, parang foreign investment negative list sa atin, with the aim to promote local products and domestic entrepreneurship. In United Kingdom, expanded the legal grounds for the government to intervene in certain mergers. In Vietnam, pinakaunang negative list sa bansa, plus yung Decree number 37, March 2020, para sa market access and incentives para sa mga lokal na business, lalo na sa mga SMEs na apektado ng COVID. Almost all new investment regulations or restriction address national security concerns as more and more countries become worried that domestic core assets and technologies may fall prey to hostile foreign takeovers in the wake of pandemic. 18 countries and economies, Austria, Canada, China, Finland, France, Germany, Hungary, Italy, Japan, Republic of Korea, Malta, New Zealand, Poland, Russian Federation, Slovenia, Spain, United Kingdom, and EU reinforce the existing FDI screening regime or newly adopted such mechanism. Okay? In Kenya and Oman and United States of America, introduced other types of restriction or restrictive measures. Dito po, Mr. Speaker, ginong sponsor, makikita niyo po yung ratio ng liberalization measures at protectionist measures sa buong mundo. Yung pong blue, yung pababang ratio po, no, o yung percentage ng liberalization sa iba't ibang bansa sa mundo. Samantalang yung red po, yan po yung tumataas na mga policy, protectionist measures ng iba't ibang bansa sa mundo. So mula po sa 2004 hanggang 2020, yung protectionist measures po na pinapakita rito ay talagang ginagawa ng iba't ibang bansa. Samantalang sa atin po ay kabaliktaran. So, kinumpirma ng pandemya ang kahalagahan ng pambansang industrialisasyon at pangangailangang suportahan ang lokal na namumuhunan at tugunan ang lokal o domestic na interes, lalo ng developing and undeveloped countries. So, Mr. Speaker, with this, ang tanong ko po sa ating kagalang-galang na sponsor, kung tayo po ay sinasabi natin na yung iba't ibang mga bansa ay very open and yet tayo ay very restrictive and very protectionist. So ano po yung mako-comment ninyo dito sa aking mga pinresentang datos as of 2020?
Mr. Speaker, on the contrary, the economic literature presented to us by the OECD, the World Bank, and other international independent assessors suggests otherwise because those economic literature is predominantly in favor of liberalization. I think we can all agree to that. In fact, let me just present to you some of the advantages of liberalization. One is it promotes economic growth. Studies suggest that positive correlation between foreign direct investment and economic growth in developing countries. Number two is create employment opportunities. The generation of both direct and indirect employment is one of the most important effects of FDI or foreign direct investment, particularly in countries where capital is relatively scarce but labor is abundant. Lalong-lalo na ho dito sa ating bansa. It improves economic welfare. It seems to suggest that FDI is favorable to economic welfare, facilitates poverty reduction. In OECD study, it is observed that while empirical evidence of the social consequences of FDI is far from abundant, the results generally supports the idea that FDI may help reduce poverty and improve social conditions. It also facilitates access to international market. The International Monetary Fund World Investment Report cited that, among others, FDI encourages development through exports by raising efficiency and enhancing marketing opportunities, which in turn creates new jobs. It also encourages technology transfer. FDI facilitates technology transfer through capital inputs, which could not be achieved by trade. The Association or the Organization of Economic and Cooperation Development also noted that economic literature cites technology transfer as probably the most important channel through which foreign entities may produce positive externalities in the host developing economy. It also assists in human capital formation. and helps create a more competitive business environment and enterprise development. It also helps improve environmental and social conditions. These are the advantages of liberalization, of encouraging the inflow of foreign direct investment as presented to us by those independent assessors like OECD, World Bank, and other experts in these sectors of our economy.
Maraming salamat, Ginoong Sponsor, Mr. Speaker, dun sa pagsagot, no? So, sinasabi natin na, yung pinakita ko po kanina, Mr. Speaker, yung mga protectionist policy po ng iba't ibang mga bansa sa panahon ng 2004 hanggat sa ngayon sa panahon ng pandemya. So, ibig sabihin po nito, Mr. Speaker, yung pong mga foreign direct investment ay nagiging mga investors ay nagiging hesitant na rin. Yung mga bansa hesitant na rin na magbukas ng kanilang ekonomiya para sa iba't ibang mga investment dahil nakita nila yung pangangailangan nung kanilang mga bansa sa panahon na ito. So the sponsor, Mr. Speaker, talks about the employment, di ba? Yung maraming mga makikreate ito ng maraming mga trabaho at maraming mga employment opportunities. Pero I beg to disagree, no? Kahit naman kahit naman ang dami na nating mga foreign investments, hindi naman bumaba yung ratio o hindi naman bumaba yung percentage ng unemployment. At hanggang ngayon naman pataas pa rin ng pataas 'yan. So hindi ibig sabihin na very restrictive or very protectionist tayo sa ating ekonomiya ay wala na tayong makikreate na trabaho. Kaya nga po ang akin pong argumento diyan, Mr. Speaker, dapat po talaga yung pagtuunan ng pansin, hindi yung tsa-tsa na ibubukas natin na ekonomiya, kundi yung pagpapaunlad ng ating mga industriya, katulad ng ginagawa ng iba't ibang bansa, yung national industrialization. Pagpapaunlad ng ating agrikultura, dahil tayo po ay agricultural country, na dapat po yung food stability, yung safety ng ating mga food ay dapat talagang yun ang primary. At tingin po natin yung hindi ito directly related doon sa mga gusto nating mga provision sa ekonomiya na para mabuksan. Meron pa rin po akong isa pang bahagi ng ating presentation.
Mrs. Speaker, let me just respond to the...
Unless gusto pong
yes, but before that, Mrs. Speaker, allow me to respond to the manifestation of Congresswoman Castro wherein she stated that it did not result or created any job at all. In fact, in 2017 data of the Philippine Statistics Authority, it is highlighted that while there was a 13.6 decline in the number of establishments, it has sustained a total employment of 1.278 or 1,278,000 in the country and an average annual compensation of 294,000 per worker, creating a total compensation of manufacturing establishment amounting to 370.7 billion. So, sino ho yung nagsasabi na hindi ito nakapaglikha ng trabaho at kita sa ating mamamayan? I'm speaking of the manufacturing industry where this sector is open for foreign equity ownership. And as of date, we have 70% of the manufacturing owned by foreign direct investors. So, yung sinasabi nyo ho na hindi nakapaglikha ng trabaho ay taliwas ho sa sinasabi ng Philippine Statistics Authority na yung manufacturing sector natin ay nakapaglikha ng at least 1.278 million jobs and an annual compensation of 294,000 per worker, and a total compensation of manufacturing establishment amounting to 370.7 billion pesos.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Sponsor. So yung sinasabi po nating data, no, so sa katotohanan po, no, yung kung titignan natin yung nililikhang trabaho noong so-called na mga FDIs at yung sinasabi nating mga manufacturing industry, kung titignan po natin ito, tignan natin yung sa kabuuan, ano ba yung kalidad ng trabaho? Ito po ba ay permanente? Ito po ba ay contract of service? At ito po ba ay yung po bang mga yung sinasabi nating yung kalidad ng trabaho o kalidad ng pamumuhay ng ating mga manggagawa ay na-attain po ba sa mga sinasabi nating mga trabaho na nilikha?
Ang katotohanan ho na pinipresenta ng data ng Philippine Statistics Authority ay yung foreign direct investment ay daladala ang malaking kapital na nagko-contribute sa ating lokal na ekonomiya. Daladala nito ay ang permanenteng or pangmatagalan na kapital that contributes to the local economy by paying taxes, so many taxes, business taxes, real property taxes, income taxes. It also brings advanced technology, management expertise, most importantly, technology transfer. And it also significantly increased the much needed employment opportunities sa ating mga kababayan. Kapital ng mga dayuhan, dala-dala ay kita ng ating bansa, kita ng ating gobyerno, at trabaho para sa ating mga kababayang Pilipino. Taliwaso ito sa ibang pahayag na kung saan ito ay hindi naglilikha ng trabaho at benepisyo sa ating bayan. At sa katunayan ho, we are a country where our capital is scarce but we have an excess labor. Ano yung nangyayari? Dahil wala ho tayong oportunidad dito sa ating bansa, dahil in a freer and open economy, maraming investor, maraming namumuhunan, nandun yung oportunidad. And that's why yung ating mga kababayan papunta sa ibayong bansa para maghanap ng oportunidad. Tayo ho, one of the, or in fact, the most restrictive economy in the world, where the restriction, only country wherein restriction is enshrined in the Constitution, we are lagging behind foreign direct investment. And so it resulted into foregone investment to the detriment of our working class, our excess labor, na walang ibang solusyon patungo sa ibayong bansa upang maghanap ng oportunidad.
Thank you, Mr. Sponsor, Mr. Speaker. Bagamat hindi po sumasang-ayon ang kinatawang ito, no, doon sa argumento, nirerespeto po natin, pero ang pag-measure po noong nung kahalagahan nitong mga foreign direct investments ay yung kalidad ng buhay meron ang mga Pilipino. Kaya nga sinasabi natin na kapag tayo po ay masyadong nangangayupa pa or masyado tayong nagiging palaasa dito sa mga foreign direct investment, sa halip na i-develop natin yung ating pansarili na national na industrialization, hindi rin ito magiging stable. At katulad nga ng mga nangyayari sa ibang bansa, lalo na sa panahon ng pandemya, talagang naging protectionist at very restrictive ang pagpasok ng mga foreign direct investments. At yung kanilang mga policy on protectionism ay pinataas pa nila para sa kapakanan ng kanilang mga mamamayan. Sinasabi natin na walang oportunidad dito sa Pilipinas at maraming milyon-milyong mga kababayan natin ang napipilitang lumabas ng bansa. Gusto ba nilang iwanan yung kanilang mga pamilya dito? Hindi po. Gusto ba nila na magpaalipin sa ibang bansa? Hindi po. Sa katunayan, marami tayong mga insidente na talagang maraming mga kababayan talaga natin na parang second class citizen sa iba't ibang mga bansa. Pero yun ang gusto po natin, instead na mga foreign direct investments, instead na mabuksan, ito yung, kasi kahit naman po hindi natin amyendahan ang ating constitution, at kahit naman po hindi natin lagyan ng unless otherwise provided by law. So bukas na po ang ating bansa. In fact, sinasabi na nga natin yung ating sovereign rights, yung ating patrimonya, lalo na sa West Philippine Sea, yung mga pinagkukunang yaman natin sa West Philippine Sea ay ay bukas na bukas pa rin, bukas na. Okay? At hindi napapangalagaan para sa ating mga mangingisda at para sa ating mga mamamayan. Kung
Mr. Speaker,
magpapatuloy po,
Mr. Speaker, let me just respond to the issue on quality of life. Yung sinasabi ho ni kagalang-galang Congresswoman Castro na walang impact o walang halaga sa quality of life yung impact ng FDI inflows. In a cross-country study, impact of foreign direct investment inflows on poverty reduction in the ASEAN and SARS economies in 2019, it showed that the increased FDIs positively impact the quality of life as measured by the Human Index in ASEAN countries. And being open to foreign direct investment addresses not just economic growth, but it also addresses economic development. Yung growth ho natin can be likened into making the pie bigger, and development is the process of making sure that everybody gets a share of the enlarged pie. Ganun ho yung sinasabing natin na oportunidad sa ating mga kababayan ay dudulot ng inflows of FDI.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sponsor, Ginoong Speaker. Nung pahintulan po ako ng sponsor, Mr. Speaker, itutuloy ko lang po yung isa po sa sinasabi ng ating sponsor at nagpapanukala nitong RBH2 ay dapat mabuksan ng ating ekonomiya para, yun nga, mag-flow yung lahat ng oportunidad para sa investment at iba pang mga oportunidad para sa trabaho at iba pa. Okay, so sinasabi ko naman po, Mr. Speaker, ano pa po ba pagbubukas ng ekonomiya ang kailangan? So pinagmamalaki po ng mga nagpapakanukala na higit pang pagpapalawig ng FDI and globalization programs ng mga nakaraang dekada. So babanggitin ko po, Mr. Speaker, dito yung mga batas na naaprubahan na po ng Kongreso at mga pinag-uusapan pa po na talagang na magbibigay sa mga foreign direct investments na talagang pumunta sa Pilipinas para mag-invest. Okay? So, agresibong globalisasyon simula Philippines 2000. Ito po yung medium-term Philippine Development Plan for 1993 to 1998. Binuksan sa dayuhang pamumuhunan ang halos lahat ng industriya. Kaya halos negligible ang kontrol ng pamahalaan sa dayuhang kapital. Hindi natin nakukuha ang mga bentahe sa produksyon, ang walang natatanggap na economic surpluses ang Pilipinas mula sa mga ito. Ibayo pang pagpapalawak ng 11th Regular Foreign Investment Negative List sa bisa ng Executive Order 65 ni Pangulong Duterte noong October 2018. Ito po yung pagbubukas natin nung mga pwede pang maibukas sa ekonomiyan mga investments. Mga amyenda sa Public Service Law, pagbubukas ng batayang public utilities sa dayuhang pamumuhunan. In fact, Mr. Speaker, 4 na lang yata doon sa natitira na sa public service law na talagang control pa ng gobyerno. At ito ay binibigay na natin sa pribado. Mga amyenda sa Foreign Investment Acts, amendments sa pagbubukas ng practice of profession sa foreigners. Mga amyenda sa Retail Trade Liberalization Act, binababaan ang minimum paid-up capital para sa dayuhang retail investors at iba pa. Ibayo pang pagluluwag, Mr. Speaker. Ito po yung pagluluwag ng tax regime para sa mga FDIs buhat ng like Create o yung dati si Tira, binabaan ang corporate income tax hanggang 20% sa 2025 at iba pa. Pagluluwag ng Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas sa mga documentary and reporting rules para sa mga foreign exchange operation. Mga amyenda sa batas, regulasyon ukol sa Philippine Economic Zone Authority. Iba pang mga batas na magbibigay ng benepisyo sa pagpasok ng FDIs na nasa bansa na, kagaya ng Ease of Doing Business and Efficient Government Service Delivery Act, Revised Corporation Code, at marami pang ibang batas at polisiyang pinatutupad sa ilalim ng kasalukuyang administration. So sabi nga po ng Ibon, Mr. Speaker, the industrial countries develop through responsible regulation of foreign investment for development. That they develop because they liberalize is a myth. They liberalize because they first develop. The current global context of growing protectionism, a turnaround from investment liberalization, and eroding multilateralism make relaxing foreign equity restriction even more inappropriate. The most powerful capitalist economies in the world have been at the forefront of thousands of protectionist measures since the onset of the protracted global crisis. So ito po, no, Mr. Speaker, ginong sponsor, meron na po tayong FDI, meron tayong Financial Institution Strategic Transfer, yung FIA, yung mga existing FIA at Abienda, Foreign Investment Export Enterprises, at ito nga po, no, yung a-approve na pala yung retail.
Mr. Speaker.
At iba pa po, Mr. Speaker. So yun, yung last po natin, ano, yung pag-approve po natin nung sa Create para sa mga corporation. So, ang tanong ko po, Mr. Speaker, ano pa bang ibubukas natin sa ekonomiya? Bukas na po through these laws, policies, na para makapag-engganyo po tayo ng mga foreign direct investment. So, ano pa po ba yung kailangan natin?
Mr. Speaker, clearly the laws that she has presented in that screen are insufficient to hurdle the challenge of attracting foreign investors into our country, because our very constitution creates a negative impression that the country is against foreign investment. As I have said earlier, we are the only country in the world whose restrictive economic provision is enshrined in the Constitution. So notwithstanding the passage of key reforms in the liberalized country, the country's FDI policy, such as Congresswoman Castro had presented earlier, our FDI net inflow from 2013, 14, 15, and 2019, kulelat na kulelat pa rin ho tayo. Bakit? Ano ho yung sinasabi ng OECD? Ano ho yung sinasabi ng World Bank? Isa lang ho ang kanilang sinasabi, that foreign equity participation is one of the statutory barriers in inviting or enticing foreign direct investment. It really influences the investor choice of location between a freer economy and an open economy, and ours who restrict foreign equity ownership to 40%. Saan ho sila pupunta? Pupunta sila doon palagi sa freer and open economies such as Vietnam, Thailand, Malaysia, obviously Singapore, dahil ho bukas ang kanilang bansa pagdating sa pagninegosyo.
Maraming salamat, Mr. Speaker, dun sa paliwanag ng ating sponsor. Dumako naman po ako doon sa education institutions and mass media. Pagmamayari at pamamahala ng mass media at ng educational institutions, ito po ba yung gusto nating buksan dito sa RBH2, Mr. Speaker? Yun ang sponsor.
Let me just explain to you that in Article 16, the insertion of the phrase unless otherwise provided by law in the said article, specifically Section 11 thereof, means Congress may allow non-Filipino citizens to own and manage mass media, and Congress may increase or decrease the percentage of Filipino ownership requirement for corporation or association that may own and manage mass media. With regard to education, in Article 14, Paragraph 2 thereof, the insertion of the phrase unless otherwise provided by law at the end of the first sentence would allow Congress, non-Filipino citizen, to own educational institution, and Congress may increase or decrease the percentage of Filipino ownership requirement for corporation or association that may own educational institution. That is the effect of the incorporation of the phrase unless otherwise provided by law.
Tapos na po ba yung ating sponsor, Mr. Speaker? So, ibig sabihin, tama po, no? Yung sinasabi natin dito na yun pong ownership at saka yung management ng eskwelahan ay ay ibubukas doon sa dayuhan. Kanina po doon sa interpellation ninyo po with Representative Vergara, binabanggit niyo po na magkaroon din ng opportunity yung ating mga estudyante na makapag-aral sa foreign countries sa pamamagitan ng pagbubukas nito sa ating bansa ng mga educational institutions. Mabibigyan ng opportunity po instead na pumunta sila sa ibang bansa. Instead na pumunta po sila sa ibang bansa, kapag bukas na po yung ating mga educational institutions, ay dito na. Tama po ba yung binabanggit nyo kanina?
Ganun ho yung practice ng ibang bansa.
Kaya gusto po
That's
natin.
why yung Hong Kong, yung Singapore, yung China, naging regional hub po sila on education. But they only invite elite universities. In the same way that they invite elite universities, they also afford their citizens to avail of low tuition fee and low standard of living. Meaning, hindi na ho pupuntang abroad. Like, for example, yung ibang kasamahan natin na nagpapaaral sa abroad. Ang mahal-mahal ho ng standard of living abroad. Kilala niyo ho ba kung sino yung isa niyong kasamahan niyo na nagpapaaral sa abroad? Ang mahal ho ng standard of living sa abroad. So instead of sending them abroad, we might as well invite those top universities here in the Philippines, elite universities, to put up their campus here so that those students within the region, we can invite them and we can afford them a lower and better standard of living and not spend so much on tuition fees. Yun ho yung logic behind allowing foreign elite universities to come here in our country.
Okay. So, sa palagay niyo po ba, ilan po bang porsyento ng ating mga mamamayan na gustong pumunta at mag-aral sa abroad?
Marami ho.
Para buksan sa foreigner itong ay ating mga educational institutions. So ilan po ba yan? Yan po ba ay kakayanin ng ating mga mamamayan? Yan po ba ay kakayanin noong mga nasa rural areas? Hindi po ba mas magandang gawin ay pataasin yung kalidad ng edukasyon natin o abroad style para ang lahat naman ng ating mga mamamayan, estudyante?
Well, I totally agree with you, Congresswoman Castro, that we need to really put up more funds, more public expenditure when it comes to education, especially to higher education, institutional education. aside from opening it up to foreign educational institution. Tama po kayo. Talagang dapat maglaan tayo ng napakalaking salapi pagdating ho sa ngalan ng edukasyon.
Okay, so in terms of yung pakinabang po sa ating mga mamamayan, so naninindigan po ang kinatawang ito na hindi po ito sa pangkalahatan at para doon po sa mga mamamayan nating mga mahihirap. Ang panukalang buksan ang mga educational institutions sa pagmamay-ari at pamamahala. Okay? So kung kukuhanin ko lang po yung statement ni Attorney Christian Monsod, Mr. Speaker, ang sabi niya, nung nakikinig po ako dun sa interpellation sa Senado, the content of education is part of our patrimony, our history and cultural roots, our values, patriotism, and heroism of our ancestors. So the EDSA event that is already being subjected to revisionism, etc. And this cannot be left for foreigners to interpret. So yan po yung tungkol doon sa education institution. And last question na po, Mr. Speaker, alam naman natin na lahat po ng ginagawa natin dito ay iniisip natin para sa kabutihan ng ating mga mamamayan in general at sa pangmaramihan. Pero sa latest survey po, Mr. Speaker, ginoong sponsor, 67% ng ating mga mamamayan ayaw ng charter change. So ano pong masasabi ng ating ginoong sponsor dito, Mr. Speaker?
Hindi ko masasagot yung inyong katanungan dahil hindi ko ho alam kung ano yung methodology ng survey. In fact, siguro po yung sinasabi niyong survey ay yung patungkol sa pagrebisa ng ating konstitusyon na kasama yung pagbago sa struktura ng ating paggugobyerno. Pero ibang-iba ho itong panukala na nakabinbin ngayon sa plenaryo. Ito ho ay limitado lamang sa restrictive economic provisions of the Constitution. Ibang-iba ho po ito yung kinundukta yung survey na nagsasabing 67% yung hindi pabor. Dahil nga ho, as I always maintain, that ang ating taong bayan hindi naiintindihan masyado kung ano yung pinapanukala sa pag-amenda na Constitution. And since they are the true owners of the Constitution, they should know and should have an informed decision on the discussion of the proposed amendment to the Constitution. Siguro, ang akin lamang dyan, pag nalaman nila na ito ay ikabubuti ng ating bansa sa pag-iimbita ng mga namumuhunang dayuhan na maglilikha ng kita, kapital, at trabaho para sa ating taong bayan, siguro magpapabor sila kaagad dito. So, what I'm saying here, ang bottom line, is this good for our country? Yes, it is. Will this benefit the Filipino people? Magbibenepisyo ho ang ating taong bayan. Pag sila ho naintindihan nila ito bilang tunay na pagmamayari ng saligang batas, ako po, syerto, sigurado, boboto sila nito sa panahon ng ratifikasyon sa isang plebisito.
Mr. Speaker, ginong sponsor, so I beg to disagree po, Mr. Sponsor, doon sa sinabi niyo po na baka hindi alam nung mamamayan yung kanilang yung kanilang sinagutan na survey. So wag po nating maliitin yung ating mga mamamayan yung mga tinanong kaugnay dito sa usapin ng Chacha. Bagamat sinasabi niyo po na economic provision, kaya nga po nakakatuwa po at kami po ay nagsisikap na talagang mag-interpellate para makita po ng ating mga mamamayan yung mga provision po na gusto nating baguhin sa Constitution at magsilbi itong educational experience sa ating mamamayan para later on magkaroon sila ng informed consent, para magkaroon po sila ng information later on kung ito po ay mararatify or i-ratify sa subject natin sa referendum, meron na pong informed consent yung ating mga mamayan. Pero as early, so sana po igalang natin yung kapasyahan ng ating mga mamamayan. Maraming salamat po, Mr. Speaker. Maraming salamat sa ating sponsor doon sa napaka-intellectual na debate. Thank you po, Mr.
Salamat,
Speaker. Thank you, Mr.
Congresswoman.
Sponsor.
And Mr. Speaker, bago po tayo magtapos, linawin ko lang po na hindi ko minamaliit yung ating taong bayan na kung saan ang sinasabi ko lamang po ay yung prinisinta nyo pong survey na 67% ay hindi pabor sa pag-amenda ng saligang batas. Yun ho ay kinundukta noong panahon na ang pinapanukala ho ay ang pagrebisa ng ating konstitusyon. Kasama ho yung patungkol sa federalismo at iba pang mga political provisions na nagpapalawig sa termino ng mga nakaupong opisyal. Ngayon ho, kakaiba. Wala pa naman hong pinipresentang survey ang mga polling station patungkol ho sa usapin ng restrictive economic provisions of the Constitution. So linawin lang ho natin, ang pinag-uusapan po ngayon ay kakaiba ho sa pinag-usapan noong 2019, noong 2020. Ngayong 2021 ho, eksklusibo lamang, nakatutok lamang po sa restrictive economic provision ng ating konstitusyon. Walang political provision, walang pagpapalawig ng termino ng mga nakaupo sa Kongreso o sino man na elected official sa ating bansa.
Mr. Majority Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I move we recognize the Honorable Law Fortune. Oh, it's on a different matter, Mr. Speaker. I withdraw my motion to recognize him. Mr. Speaker, I move we suspend consideration of RBH number 2. So move, Mr. Speaker.
Is there any objection? Hearing none, the motion is approved.
Mr. Speaker, I move we recognize the Honorable Representative Lawrence Law Fortune from the 1st District of Agusan Norte for a short manifestation on another matter. So move, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Law Fortune is recognized for his manifestation.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Honorable Majority Leader. Mr. Speaker, this representation wrote our Honorable Secretary General, Mark Leandro Mendoza, on the intent of this representation to register a vote of abstention on House Resolution number 1628 on the commemoration of the role of the Philippines in the circumnavigation of the world. Mr. Speaker, while I join our esteemed colleagues in commemorating the role of the Filipino nation in this very important and historic event, I express reservations on the mention of a specific location that is inconsistent with the claims and position of our local historians in the city of Butuan. However, Mr. Speaker, since voting on House resolutions is done by ayes and nays, the particular vote of each member is not reflected on the record. It is for this reason, Mr. Speaker, that I have to rise to make of record my particular vote on this measure. In deference to our esteemed local historians in the city of Butuan and my dear kababayans, Mr. Speaker, I hereby register and make of record my vote of abstention on House Resolution number 1628. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, honorable colleagues.
Thank you, Honorable Fortune. Your manifestation is properly noted by the Secretary General. Majority Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I move that we tackle on second reading House Bill number 8736 and direct the Secretary General to read the title of the said bill.
The Secretary General is directed to read the title of the bill.
House Bill 8736, an act establishing a rental housing subsidy program for informal settler families and appropriating funds therefore.
All those are in favor. Majority Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I move that the chairperson of the Committee on Housing and Urban Development, Representative Jose Francisco Benitez be recognized to begin the sponsorship of the said measure.
Representative Kiko Benitez is hereby recognized. Move to
Motion to suspend.
suspension. Session. Hello. Session resume.
Mr. Speaker, I move that we suspend consideration of Committee Report Number 753 on House Bill Number 8736. So moved, Mr. Speaker.
Is there any objection? Hearing none, motion is approved. Majority Leader.
Mr. Speaker, on behalf of the majority, I move to nominate and elect as Vice Chairperson of the Committee on Legislative Franchises the Honorable Wilter Sharkey V. Palma II, Vice the Honorable Michael Defensor. Mr. Speaker, I move that we elect the Honorable Anthony Peter Onyx D. Crisologo as Vice Chairperson of the Committee on Games and Amusements. Mr. Speaker, I move that the position of the Honorable Wilter Sharkey V. Palma II as Deputy Majority Leader be considered vacant. Mr. Speaker, on behalf of the majority, I move that the position held by the Honorable Anthony Peter Onyx Crisologo as Assistant Majority Leader be declared vacant. On behalf of the majority, Mr. Speaker, I move to nominate and elect as Deputy Majority Leader the Honorable Lawrence R. Defensor. Further, Mr. Speaker, on behalf of the majority, I move to nominate and elect as Assistant Majority Leader the Honorable Hill Cabarangay Jr. A. Acosta. Mr. Speaker, on behalf of the majority, we nominate and elect Honorable Ducil Marie S. Cardema as member of the Committee on Appropriations, Vice the Honorable Nestor Fongwan. Mr. Speaker, on behalf of the majority, we also nominate and elect the Honorable Sabiniano Canama as member of the Committee on Cooperatives Development. So moved, Mr. Speaker.
Is there any objection? Hearing none, the following are hereby elected. Representative Wilter Sharkey Palma as Vice Chairperson of the Committee on Legislative Franchises. Vice Mike Defensor. Representative Mike Defensor. Representative Onyx Crisologo as Vice Chairperson of the Committee on Games and Amusement. Congratulations. As Deputy Majority Leader, Vice Wilter Palma, Representative Lawrence Defensor. As Assistant Majority Leader, Hill Cabarangay Acosta, Vice Representative Anthony Onyx Crisologo. And Representative Marie Cardema, Vice Kongwan as member of APRO. Congratulations, Majority Leader. The motion for the election of the following representatives are hereby approved. Majority Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I move that we adjourn session till March 15, Monday, 3 o'clock in the afternoon. So moved, Mr. Speaker.
Session is adjourned until Monday, March 15 at 3 p.m. Session suspended. Session adjourned.